thank you all for turning up this morning. Here to have a conversation about committee structures, see where we fall today. The Karakia.
Morena tātou, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia ma kinakina ki uta, kia ma taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, e tio, hi hoka, e hauhu, tihei, Māori ora.
Thank you, Greg. Hopefully the meeting will conclude by 12:30. Any apologies? Yeah, put one in for Mike, and that's it. Yeah, okay, thank you. Cheers. Thank you, Pamela. Call for any amendments to the agenda? Okay, oh, sorry, all carried. Okay. The agenda of the meeting, Grand Catchment, 13th of June. Confirmed and business. Yep. Yep. So do you like to move it? Noel, Warren, carried. All in favour, sorry. Right. Any disclosures of interest? On. Carried. It's in yours.
Yeah, so good morning, members. I'd just like to acknowledge we've got a few staff online to join us for the discussion today. So we have our Manager, Flood Protection and Drainage, Adam Munro. We have our Zone Manager for Waikato, Sarah Leland, and our Manager for Waihaupiako, so Zone Manager Waihaupiako, Jodie Kochian. And given we are delving into governance structures today, I've also asked Marley Ahapini, our Po Tohono, to join us as well, just in case we need any guidance in that regard. That is it, and I'll be fronting the paper today. Okay, next, are we ready to move on to the agenda item? Right, next slide, please. So the paper that you have, we've just got one paper to run through today as a committee, and what I'll step you through is providing some opportunity to discuss background and history to the arrangements of our community advisory, arrangements that we've had in the past and what we have looking forward. Also seeking some discussion and ultimately recommendation from the committee to council regarding 3 options that have been put forward in regard to taking a step forward for this particular triennium, those being making no change to council's current governance arrangements, introducing subcommittees into council's existing governance structure, or making arrangements outside of council's governance structure to achieve ultimately the same purpose. And the third item that we'll cover off, depending on the option that is preferred by the committee and recommended to council by the committee, is to also delve into the various elements that make up a terms of reference for a committee and seek some discussion and ultimately guidance from the committee around what that terms of reference might look like. Ultimately, a recommendation paper will be put to full council for the 29th of June meeting. And depending on the outcome from today's decision in terms of option 1, 2 or 3, we'll also look to append a proposed terms of reference in that regard. Any questions from the committee members before I crack on?
So, as I said to you guys, this is the last few days, if you want to dive into a proposal,
If we want to dive into a proposed terms of reference, why haven't we been able to see the one that I understand from you, Robbie, that we're in, Noel, that we've got? You've got.
So at the moment, we don't have a proposed terms of reference.
That's not what I've heard from Robbie and Noel. I'm not talking about a staff proposed terms of reference. I'm talking about what you guys have told me you've designed.
There's something been put together, and whether we're at cross purposes with Greg as to whether they're terms of reference, but I believe that they were the basis of the terms of reference. And I hear you loud and clear. You know my feeling on your request. Perhaps could I just ask that we hold that back for a moment and come to the first part of the decision is whether we're going to have committees, and if we are, whether inside or outside council. And then I think we could go into some of the work, but you know, like we have a structure, if that's what we end up proposing to go forward to council. So it's probably the old chicken and egg situation is, do you do this and release it and preempt a decision, or do you get the principles sorted first as to whether we're having it or not having it? And if we're having it, which do we prefer? So that's what I've heard strongly from Greg.
So look, I absolutely get that, but if I want to know what it's going to look like before I decide whether we have it. That's kind of where I'm coming from, because if we're on completely different pages as to what the I've forgotten the proper name for the three options, but the formal option, then I mean I've got a personal view on what the formal option should look like. I'd be quite happy to support the formal option, but if that's completely at odds with what other members' interpretation of what formal looks like, then I don't even agree to having them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And through you, Mr. Chair, so the paper itself delves in, I guess, to the different elements that make up a terms of reference. The intent is to build a terms of reference from today's discussion and put it forward to council for ultimate decision on adjusting its governance structure. Remembering today is simply making recommendation. The committee's only making recommendation to council in terms of where to from here. But through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll be in the hands of the committee on this one. The intent of the order of today was to explore the options. They're up on the screen first, and then get into some of the details around what makes up a terms of reference, whether or not it would be useful to have that discussion first around the different elements that would comprise the terms of reference before then ultimately going to those three options for consideration might be useful.
Look, I really think it would, because in my time I've seen versions of formality which include catchment community appointed catchment committee chairs sitting around this table. And if we're going back to that, then I've got serious reservations about it. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about in terms of wanting to understand what page you guys are on after all the discussions. I mean, it's been 6 months now, but otherwise, and that's what probably what's frustrating me so much. We're just coming together, yes or no, today, and anyway.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I suggest we jump in the hands of yourself, Mr. Chair, with the order.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, well, my position is more or less what you've just heard over there. So unless you have some form of terms of reference to consider, there's no way of actually knowing how the various options will operate. And I'm finding it extremely surprising that apparently in the past, this council has used various variants of what's in front of us today, and I'm assuming that those operations had terms of reference, so there should be at least examples of the style and content of terms of reference for the options that are put in front of us. But I'm also finding the whole process particularly unsatisfactory because we have a paper in which no one is even going to give us a recommendation. Now, I would have thought if there's been a whole lot of work going on in the background and some consideration and thought going into this process that we would at least, I'm assuming at some point you're going to tell us what you actually want, because at the moment it's a great mystery to me what's going on now. This is a series of options with no recommendation, no idea at all of the terms of reference. And actually I'm wondering now also about the process of this committee's recommendation not actually occurring. There isn't actually not going to be a committee recommendation because in fact you're putting the whole decision off to a full council meeting. So I'm questioning process and I want some response from the chair and anybody else in relation to why we couldn't at least see some form of terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. My understanding was if myself or Noel released anything, we were predetermining the meeting, and that's what I've been told, and I've stuck to that. I said I'm quite willing to discuss my point of view, but we couldn't release any documents. Otherwise, it would be that we were predetermining the meeting.
So where did that advice come from?
Us staff and others. Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't actually ask for the specific terms of reference. So I thought there might be some examples out there that we could see to get some sort of sense of the operations of these three options. So that's the first point I'd make. But the second question then again comes back to, in fact, this committee is not going to make a recommendation. In fact, what's going to happen here is the decision is going to be passed over to the full council meeting. Is that the way I'm reading it?
So this committee has been asked to make a recommendation to full council regarding the options that are put forward today.
But it can't because it
ultimately-
hasn't seen the terms of reference.
So I will pass to Marley shortly for a commentary on the process. What I would add to the conversation is that the paper does contain some discussion around the various elements that make up any terms of reference, and discussions provided in that paper around what previous traineums have involved, along with discussions so far in regards to establishing these particular proposals today.
Can I just like to take a few moments to set the scene, if I may. So when council was constituted and there was discussion, we went out as a result of the mandate that we were given, went out and met with the community members in the Waihao Piako and in the Lower Waikato, as that was where the noise was coming from, and also some of the bigger issues. So we went out there and Waihao Piako, Ben and Pamela, Robbie and I met along with staff, a number of community members, and we also went to Lower Waikato again. I'm not sure, Ben, that you were there on that day. Yes. So we took feedback from those members, landowners and former representatives of drainage or scheme committees, and there was some robust discussion, some strong requests that the committees of the past 3.5 years ago were reinstated, and then that was narrowed down to at least a committee that had scheme and drainage combined as one, and try and minimise the extras on the committees. So some work was done, and Greg went to other regional councils to see what was happening there, and produced a model from the Bay of Plenty which showed the committees operated outside of council and continued beyond trienniums, and were given airtime by staff, and whilst they weren't formal recommendations, listened to the concerns from those committees. Robbie and I became quite concerned how this was dragging out and going nowhere. We came together and we were of a similar mind, and essentially directed or requested strongly that we get something underway, and we incorporated the feedback from the landowners. And what our intent here is to get, I'll jump to the end result, or as close to as I can get without the committee sanctioning that yet, is that we reconstitute a committee in each area, where we have representatives from river, drainage, dock, Genesis and the Lower Waikato, and iwi as appropriate, and the numbers, and at least 2 councillors from the region. not having the Waikato district representative, as that was unnecessary, we believed. So we put that to Greg, and we met with Pamela. Pamela asked some searching questions. We did ask if we were being brought into the naughty boys room, but I think she listened well and took on board what the community had said, and on that basis. One of the questions that was asked is, well, what are you doing about everywhere else? Well, the reality is we need to get started somewhere, and this is a first attempt at doing what we believe is the right thing. And we, likes of, just picking on drainage for a moment, Akaha Drainage District has continued to operate independent of council, and staff have met with them and regularly meet with them, and they continue. So whilst we're looking at putting drainage into this committee, we are going to encourage informally meetings outside of council from the drainage individuals who are interested in, they were 3-4 years ago, and having meetings within the week prior to ICM, where anything that's in the agenda that needs comment on, those thoughts can be taken on board by the representatives that will go forward to the committees in both areas. We did originally look at 4 committees, but we've narrowed that down to 2. One, because of cost, and a minimum of 2 meetings rather than 3 per annum, and with the ability for each of those committees to make recommendations. And we've made it quite clear to the landowners and interested parties that these committees will be able to make recommendations, but they are not and will not be the final decision makers. That will rest with ICM and council, and that has been accepted well. I'm happy to take questions on it, Mr. Chairman, if that's what you want, but if there's anything that you or Greg would like to add to that. And so we actually sat down and we worked out probably a basis of a terms of reference, and whilst Greg may say it's not a terms of reference, to my way of thinking, it was certainly the start of what we thought and how they might operate and the likes. And just stepping back, to Greg's credit, Chris McClay gave him clear directions that he was to write this report in a very neutral manner, not to make any recommendations. It was to come from this committee, and the council and staff were not to put personal views into this report, and it was to be entirely at the sole discretion of the committee to make any recommendation to the full council. So I don't know whether I've captured it sufficiently, Mr. Chair, but happy to take questions.
100% exactly what you said is what took place.
I was first. So this just confirms to me poor process, I have to say. So this is a committee of the Waikato Regional Council. It is not a committee of specific constituencies of the Regional Council. So the vacuum that has been created here has essentially left councillors such as me in a complete information void. So we've heard now on some process that's been undertaken by a select clique of the committee, including the chair. Don't interrupt while I'm speaking, please. Can I finish? So the question I've got is, why haven't you run a more open process where you brought the range of interests of this committee into the discussion before we get to the point today where we're being asked to make a decision without any terms of reference on a particular option? It just doesn't make sense. There's no logic. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry you feel that way, but we were asked to myself and Noel have been asked to decide how we were going to do flood protection and drainage in the lower Waikato and Karakia plains, and that's what those things that you're asking for. we can talk about that in the future of what we want to do with other catchments and everything else. But this is what these constituents want in those catchments. And previously, these catchments were up and running in the last triennium and in the ones before, and they had a lot more rights than what we're going to give to these ones. So I'm sorry if I've offended you, Bruce, but that's that from the day I've got here was, and most probably Noel, was to reinstate some form of flood protection and drainage committees as soon as possible. Nali, please.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute. I have not had involvement in the discussions to date. However, there has been some questioning about process followed, and so just to provide hopefully some useful comment in that regard, this particular matter is certainly within the scope of this committee, but it isn't within delegation, hence a recommendation to council is the appropriate mechanism for decision making. We've heard some views already on this topic related to, I guess, the information that has been provided and I guess involvement in the process so far. It's certainly a responsibility for each member in the committee to determine whether or not individuals within the committee or the committee itself feels that they have, or it has, the committee received sufficient information in order to make decisions. And given that is the tone of the discussion so far, I guess from here, it's necessary to focus further discussion on whether or not it is possible for individuals within the committee to glean the information that they need to make a robust decision from today in questioning and discussions, or if not, whether there is an option perhaps to circulate further information if there is still an information gap, and or of course I guess identifying an alternative way forward, which might be more time. There's probably other options as well, which no doubt we will get to through further discussion on the topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to, I suppose, address a comment that was just made about a clique of people making this decision. To be clear, I am the chair of this council, and I met with the chair and deputy chair of this committee on a number of occasions to ensure that they were making progress on the intent of council that was established back in November when this committee was formed. And so those conversations happen. It doesn't mean that decisions get made amongst the three of us in those meetings. And I take umbrage at the accusation put forward in that. I suppose I would like to get us back to the principles as Councillor Smith was outlining, that's the desire today, is to talk about the principles that have come forward as a result of a number of community conversations, right? We had the meeting with the Lower Waikato. We also had the meeting over in Waihaupō. There were subsequent meetings, such as a gathering up in Aka with the Drainage Network group up there, just to get their feedback. I am sure that each and every one of us has had a number of contacts from constituents that are interested in how we intend to ensure that targeted ratepayers have a voice in the decisions, particularly around flood and drainage infrastructure. And so my understanding is that the options that have been put forward don't include detailed terms of reference, because to go through the effort to draw up a terms of reference for each of these options, utilizes time, energy, and money. And we wanted to, as I understand it, this committee wanted to ensure they understood the direction of travel. What is this committee's response to the feedback that has been received from the community, and what is this committee's, I suppose, direction of travel, whether it's the status quo, there's nothing, there's the inside of council subcommittee, there's the outside of council subcommittee. Those are the options that are presented. This was just a mere temperature take on how is this committee feeling about each of those, and what further information, if there is any, is necessary in order for this committee to make a recommendation to full council on what is best going to allow that community voice, which, as I understood it, this council was in support of ensuring we preserved. How we go about that, that's what we're discussing today, as I understand it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pamela.
So, firstly, I'm right behind you, Greg and Chris, in terms of you guys need to be quite neutralist. Absolutely support that. And I told Chris the other day, because he told me before he left, just as a casual conversation. My issue here, and the next thing I'll say is, from what you and Noel have told me, I'm right behind it. And you talk about temperature take, so my comment would be, council's unbelievably bureaucratic, and I get that as well as you guys know that. This is a rather bureaucratic way of taking the temperature, because I think we already know what the blooming temperature is. I have yet to find any of my other 13 councillors that is against the concept of a catchment advisory committee. The only thing I don't think I heard you mention, Bruce, which is and look, I'll be really honest, and I know it's probably been recorded, and I'm not going to ask those of you in the constituencies we're talking about to have a view, because it might come back and bite you, but my single biggest concern is who's going to chair these committees, because there's just been too many negative experiences as a result of community elected chairpersons of some of these committees in the past, and I simply don't want to be party to endorsing a continuation of that. Hence, I want to see the constituent councillor chairing these committees, and I made that really clear, and I explain why.
Yep.
But because the reality is, if we give it to the committees to choose, we've got no control. It makes it very hard for Greg and his team to rein in some of that negative behaviour, and I'll say some because it's by no means all. And I haven't been involved in those committees in the two areas we're talking about for quite some years to understand when it happened and when it didn't. But you guys all get my drift. So that's my single biggest concern. So everything you've told me, I'm supportive of. If you're going to tell me that you're happy to support the concept of elected councillors chairing them, I'm right behind it, but it just feels like we've got 20 pages with actually what's a really simple decision. And I just, if you guys are going to go, no, we're not going to support you having a constituency councillor chairing them, then I'm not going to support the formal, option 2. Yeah. If you are going to support a constituency councillor, I'm more than happy with option 2, and hence I said to you the other day, I see no reason why you couldn't have flicked out an email, you guys, not Greg, saying this is what we want. Bingo, we could have been in and out of here in 10 minutes in my book, hey? But that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously everyone around this table is aware that this is the voice that did come to us back in November. It's what our constituents want. I went and spoke to Emily O'Donnell up in my area, just to get a feeling, obviously coming in completely unaware of how these things worked, how she found it, how they worked in the past for the Coromandel Hauraki area, to get a bit of a feedback. I do find this document as a, although it doesn't list specific terms of reference, as a point to start with that sort of thing, fine. You've given a scope of activity, geographic boundaries, powers to act, powers to recommend, membership, cost of service, which I appreciate because the economy of it is one of the things that I'll be looking at. And yet I'm happy to move forward with where we are and carry on with the discussion around this. But I certainly support the committee's ideas.
Thank you. And look, I'll be absolutely blunt and honest. I would like to have done this differently. Probably sat down with you all in a room and just had a damn good chat about it. But the other issue is November was a long, long time ago. And we made a commitment to get on and make decisions. What I've done is I circulated this paper to the three drainage districts that fall within the Lower Waikato and to the members of the flood protection network up there. And some of those are guys can be quite ropey at times. And I asked them to provide feedback verbally if they wished by phone or preferably in writing. Some have just sent emails and a couple have rung me and subsequently sent emails. All are supportive of option 2. I was pleased to see that they came to that conclusion because it pretty much reflects what the community wants. But I know Robbie and I and Greg have talked strongly, and Pamela as well, about we've got to put a stake in the ground. We're responding to community interest. It's huge, that land that's protected and drained in those two areas. But I recognise, like so up in the Coromandel, and Michael's talked about Taupo, there is not the request for these formalised committees, but there is requests for networks and the contact with staff. And that's what we want to progress once this is in place. Now, Stu, coming direct to your point about who chairs it, I hear exactly what you're saying, but just because you're a councillor doesn't mean to say you're a good committee chair. So I've always said that the best person for the job, and if that is a councillor, that's fine. I know from my personal experience of having been a chair in that arena previously, and been on other committees, a bad chair in this area can take it in completely wrong directions. So I understand and hear you completely. If you've got confidence in the constituent councillors, I am relaxed either way, but I would not support someone who is not up to the job. So if I can leave it at that.
So just to clarify, if it's someone from within this council who starts making Greg's staff's lives unpleasant, we've got mechanisms to haul them in. If it's a community member who votes for us as constituent councillors, it's a hell of a lot harder. And history, I think, has proven very clearly that it's almost impossible to do. Look, at the end of the day, if constituent councillors can't take on the responsibility, are not prepared to take on the responsibility of chairing 2 or 3 catchment committee meetings a year, then they shouldn't take on the role of being a constituency councillor. Because the workload is still a fraction of what yours is, Chair Pamela.
Benjamin.
Yeah, so we know that the Waihau and Waikato farmers want these committees, and what we do know is that it fell apart at the last, every time you have an election. So there's some need for continuity there. This is a mechanism to achieve that. We do need to look at option 2 and whether that expands to all of these other ones that were there in 2016 and the cost that might incur. But if there's a concern here about process, it seems to me that what we're hearing now is Greg has been specifically asked not to provide a recommendation, which makes it difficult in reading these documents to know which one. Are we going for option 2
for everyone, or option 2 for just this one, or is it limited to this specific Waihao, Waikato area? Which is what it comes back to the terms of reference thing. Whether this is ready to go to full council yet, or whether we need another meeting where, because it seems to me that we actually have to make a decision about which one we want at this meeting, because staff aren't allowed to provide a recommendation. They were not, it wasn't considered, this is a governance issue that we have to come to terms with first. And that there is maybe then a process of terms of reference before it goes to council. Would that resolve these issues?
Chair, I'm concerned that it's
You're
taken
keep
so long.
avoiding
Sorry,
my
I'm sorry.
light.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm in the space of death here. No one ever sees you. Look, the main point I wanted to make also was more or less following on from what Ben just made, is that we have to be careful not to make the assumption that the other parts of the region are not important. So it's not just about where the noise comes from. It's about a model which is going to apply across the region. And that's my main concern, is that we're only hearing about a subset of the issue. Now, so Ben just sort of foreshadowed it when he made the comment about the other parts of the region. So that's the bit I want to hear more about. Thank you.
Could I just make one other point? I get where you're going with the continuity thing, but I don't believe we have the authority to set these committees up to continue beyond each triennium. And the reality is they've got no committee to report to anyway, so can't stop them from getting together and having a powwow. But let's be realistic about what we're doing here, you know. There's absolutely nothing stopping this council at the day of this triennium ends, putting in a recommendation, a paper for the new council to read and say, hey, we think you should continue these.
And I think that's a really good thing that the council in the past hasn't done, and that's something we need to look at. Definitely, that gives it. Or have you?
Kia ora. I think I'm on the list.
Yeah. Sorry, Tibbet.
Okay, so I'm in support of some type of community advisory arrangements too. Thank you for the people who've done this work. What I'm trying to understand, if this is a staged process, this is stage 1, Waikato Waiho, with the potential, should those communities want it, are there any proposed costings? Because the catchment was costly last time we did it. So I'm saying, do you want us to pick the model and then it'll be costed? Just trying to understand the process thinking from here. Thank you.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair, this was intended to be the first stage, and making recommendations specifically around these. I guess the thoughts that we have given to the broader region, and also covering broader areas, is that I think it's open for a potentially further discussion around what the best mechanism for community engagement would be, particularly because the issues are broader. You know, it's about more than just flood protection infrastructure, for example. The stakeholders are broader as well, in terms of those who are interested. Geographical areas are potentially broader as well.
Yeah, but I guess if we stayed on catchment though, you know, the community a season ago, we're used to having this approach. Then we're going to go back with a bespoke approach for each area that could, again, I'm just trying to understand what the cost implications are for council, that approach.
I mean, so I've outlined in the paper the cost implications for running these kind of meetings. It is primarily staff time that is used to undertake these meetings, and so it is an opportunity cost, and that is taking staff time across various roles away from other things that they would otherwise be doing. I still think in terms of the broader region and taking into account broader catchment issues, I think that is a further discussion that needs to have, particularly around, you know, what actually the size of that commitment would look like, what the mechanism would look like once we move beyond this first stage. But I think it's going to be an important consideration for council.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's something I didn't touch on was where to from here. The reality is we don't know what we don't know, but the reality is also that we haven't got other communities on our doorstep knocking the door down saying we want these committees, we want this representation. So we have got the opportunity going forward, if we were to put these two committees in place, to work through the LTP and look at further afield and what sort of arrangements, because that has always been part of the discussion as to what may be the needs in other areas. And I know Warren has raised issues for the Coromandel, Michael for the Taupo, and the likes. So we are not yet certain of what those needs might be, but we are of what they are in Waikato, Lower Waikato and Waihaupia. So we've got landowners with a huge vested interest. We've got the Genesis, we've got DOC and iwi that we think should be involved. So what I would like to see, and it may, and I apologise if you've been kept in the dark, and that's not been deliberate. It's just, I found this quite a cumbersome process. I'm used to being upfront and transparent and engaging. It seems to have been completely the opposite for me here, but I'm not making excuses. I've put my weight behind and name behind this proposal today, and I'm prepared to stand by it. So I think for me, there's a couple of issues that whatever the recommendation is, that we need to look at the what ifs if other communities want to be involved. Should a councillor be involved as the chair in those catchments committees if they're put in place? And I can understand Stu's, because I understand the history and examples that he's relying on there. So I think we come back to the principle. Do we support the request from these two areas for the committees that have been asked for? We've spent time working with, and believe me, it was hard to say drainage is not going to have its own committee.
Yeah.
We're going to put it together as one, and that proposal has now been put to the protagonists up there in the Lower Waikato, and that will come back supporting option 2. If we wait and we wait to get everybody, like the old saying, all things to all people all of the time, you just can't do it. And it won't happen on council. We'll be at the next train and before we know it without doing anything. So I would like to see us take a leap of faith and get these up and running, invite comment from others in a guarded way, insofar as if you give expectations to people, they will want it. So we have to be careful of how we go forward in looking at providing future opportunities. And one of our thoughts was to have a network of catchment that is supported by the constituent councillors, but not necessarily on a formalised way as we're proposing for these two areas. But again, that's something that we would need support and more discussion on. But we couldn't, if we wait to get all that wrapped up, it's going to be next year before anything happens, and we're halfway through the triennium. Yeah. So I'll leave it now. Thanks.
Tipper, thank you.
Probably just really interested to understand what the working group understands by tangata whenua participation, because it wasn't that successful in the last time we had catchment committees. It wasn't therefore taken on board by the catchments unless you've got a frame for it. Trying to talk treaty or tangata whenua issues that in those forums normally falls on communities that are least engaged. So again, just wanting to understand the inclusion or what the role of tangata whenua on these committees are, because then I'll have to back it at ICMC. Just in the mind of the committee. Thank you.
Just from my personal witnessing of the likes of Maxine Moana Tafongai, she was an excellent chair of the Central Waikato scheme, and she came across onto the Central Waikato drainage, and her skill set and challenges to the committees. She used the Y word a lot, and her taking the issues back to the land, the tangata whenua, I was really impressed with. So just, it comes down to the quality of the appointment. Because, like there's ecological issues, there's biodiversity issues, and I'm not an expert in either of those areas, but nor am I in the kaitiaki and the likes. So to me, if it's a partnership, we need to cover the base, and I don't want to see appointments for the sake of appointments, because we didn't see people turning up when that sort of thing was made. But when you had somebody who took a genuine interest in the outcomes that we were seeking with rivers and drainage, I think it can have.
Yeah. And then again, if I go to Lower Wakato, there was a time when the member felt isolated and ostracised by the committee for holding his unique view. So you get it both ways. I'm just saying, what's the committee's role? And again, providing for, if it's not in the terms of reference, those views to be, kaitiaki views to be brought to the table. If it's not noted specifically, then it's up to the will of people. And I don't think that that's partnership.
That will be in the terms of reference, I believe. I hope it would be.
And
Thank you, Noel.
I think this committee could make that recommendation.
yeah, and
As part of
I'd have to say, in both the meetings with Lower Waikato and Karakia, all targeted ratepayers and all members that were there that day all asked for better engagement with iwi and wanted iwi to turn up to meetings and how to facilitate that better. That was a discussion that both sides had. It was Greg, was that a fair statement? Yeah. We struggled to get iwi to the table, and how to do a better job in that space was discussed. It was quite a bit of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, certainly one of these committees, and and it was the North Waikato one, there was a reason for that, Robbie, and it goes back to the same comments I made before about membership and chairmanship. We can have all the terms of reference in the world, but if you've got the wrong person in the seat and we can't control who's in there. So.
Bruce.
Just wanted to piggyback on Noel's comments before, because he also made a point which is underlying my concerns, because we've not really had a discussion around the scope of the ones that you're putting up. I'm getting the sense from the discussion that the scope of those proposed committees is extremely narrow. It's on flood protection and land development. And I haven't heard any evidence today that it was going to cover off other issues of the style that you mentioned, Noel, which was included biodiversity. And that may be okay, but it may also not be okay. It depends. You see, that comes back to providing us with some evidence of the scope of the committee proposal and its terms of reference. See, we're sitting here not knowing enough about the nature and scope and activity of the committee that is being proposed and being asked to consider supporting it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Bruce's point, I mean, in point 7 there in background, it certainly covers all those items of biodiversity, biosecurity, et cetera, just interested, Bruce, on feedback you've had with your constituents around these community groups and that sort of thing, and feedback from your area.
Yes, the reason for my comment, Warren, was that as discussed today by the committee chair and others, it's really been about flood protection and land development. The word biodiversity was not mentioned until a moment ago, and when Noel talked about this possibility, and yes, it's in the document, but it's an ongoing issue that we have, I believe, in the sense that we constantly get told that these things are part of the process, but we see limited evidence at times that they are. So that's again why I'm interested in more background on, I guess, on the scope of what is proposed and the terms of reference. And just picking up on Warren's comment, you see, the nature of these committees may vary from place to place. There will be different parts of our region that will have greater emphasis on different components to the ones that have been highlighted here today. And that's the other bit that I'm sitting here wondering about, you see. So There are many parts of the region where, in fact, they may be way more interested in discussing only biodiversity and biosecurity and don't give a toss about flood protection, depending on where they are. And this is the thing. So you've got two committees, first cab off the rank. I just wanted to give up a warning. No noise does not equal no interest. That's the other point I wanted to make.
I understand where you're coming from, and to say there's biodiversity was not in the committees, that every committee meeting there's a paper on biodiversity in every one, and every committee, especially drainage that I sat on, they wanted to do more in that space with every single spare dollar they had for drain plantings, riparian areas. They were trying to do more. So it was a big part of those catchment groups. So I take what you're saying, Bruce, but it's these catchments and flood protection take that a lot more strongly than what you think they do. That's my opinion by sitting on the committees. Have you got it? You say to that or Greg?
Just to say that biodiversity is intrinsic in everything we do, and it's critical for the management of our schemes. I think the constant reference that you're hearing from today's discussion around flood protection and land drainage is very much around the interest in how those schemes are managed. Biodiversity is a critical component and becoming more and more critical for how we manage those schemes going forward. It's more than just about topping up stop banks, keeping pumps going, etc. We are required by council to achieve biodiversity related outcomes in anything we do.
Yeah, I just want to come back to what we've got up there. Option 1, no change. So we need to come to a decision about whether we're going to stick with that. Option 2 is subcommittees. Now, are the subcommittees only going to be for flood protection and land drainage, which is just the Waihao Waikato, or not? Or are we looking at subcommittees across the whole, and this is stage 1? We've been, without a recommendation, we've been kind of left in a kind of limbo land with that. And the costing that Tipper was talking about is $10,000 a meeting, but that doesn't include yet member remuneration or engagement with other parts of WRC, for example, the biosecurity people coming involved. We're starting to look at 50K a meeting. Are there 3 these are the things that we don't yet have in terms of moving forward and making a decision. It seems to me that we had to have this meeting in a neutral way because we are setting up a subcommittee, which is something the councillors need to do, not staff recommend. But are we back to just flood protection and land drainage, which is what we had in 2019 to 22, Waikato Waipa, or is it the 2016 model where they were all over the place and cost a fortune? Or are those going to be advisory committees like option 3? This is what I guess we need to decide. Those are the things we need to decide because staff aren't allowed to recommend it.
Mr. Chair, I believe that we're looking, with Ben's questioning, at the whole picture. What you're not being asked to do today is decide the whole picture. Today is about getting 2 areas off the ground and a commitment to look forward at how the other areas are addressed in a proactive but not that proactive a way, because I don't want to set expectations within the community that aren't met by the community themselves. So if an area wants something, we need to be able to work with them going forward. So what I'm looking, just coming to me in this way, is that we've got a staged approach, which is what I said earlier, is that we're looking at these 2 areas. They've been advocating. We made a commitment in November, as Warren has touched on as well. And this is to deal with those genuine and real concerns. And it's, there's a huge area in that that's defended in some manner or drained. And there's a huge amount of the GDP coming out of those areas for the Waikato. So it's not an insignificant area that we're talking about. other areas appear to have some needs, but whether no one is standing on our doorstep saying, we need a committee to do this. We would like the ability to recommend. That's where I see if we divorce ourselves from that future stage and address that through the next few months or whatever. And then if we're looking at funding, looking at the LTP going forward, I think Robbie and I have been very cautious about the costs and mindful of costs going forward. The reality is some of the members who have previous members of the committees who have come to these meetings have talked about, we want these committees, so we are prepared to contribute towards the cost of them. At the moment, I'm told that comes out of general rate and democracy. I, as an interested party, because I pay drainage and river rates, I too would be prepared to see that happen because it's something that the landowners are asking for. You don't get something for nothing, and I don't expect the whole of the region to pay for something that's peculiar to a small group. So that's another issue, funding going forward. We're dealing with the here and now. So I think whilst we're trying to answer every question that we can put up, we can't. We're looking at these two areas today. In the back of my mind, is that a precedent? It could be, but not necessarily, because other areas are different and are at the moment being dealt with differently. The one issue that's come up about the ongoing nature of these committees, there is nothing to stop these committees once constituted under option 2, if that's successful, that they, as I think Stu alluded to, continue beyond the triennium in an informal manner with staff. And if that's how it then transpires and goes into the future, all well and good. But we've got to get the community's confidence, and at the moment there's a void. So I don't know, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure how much more we need to. Is there more questions that we can help answer?
Well, I can tell you now, based on my experience, if you come back to council meeting with all this laid out how you want it, we're going to spend 3 hours at council meeting sorting this out. Tell you now. You guys need to get a workshop together of ICM, because council will go, hey, ICM, what do you guys recommend? Oh, we don't know, we haven't done it.
So you want a terms of reference?
Well, did you get where I'm going? Look at the discussion we're having here now. How do you imagine it's going to go with 14 people in the room?
Sure, I'll probably say
I wish you the best of luck, Pamela, but it's going to be tough going, man.
Drainage and river ratepayers are a significant group of people in the region.
Hang on. No one is arguing against what you're wanting to get. I'm arguing about how we're going to sort the blooming detail out, eh? It's going to be a bloody nightmare in a council meeting. Because neither of you two guys have responded other than to say, oh, you understand where I'm coming from with the chairmanship thing. Well, that means we're going to have the whole bloody chairmanship debate again out in a council meeting.
Happy for this committee to say we're having councillors only as chair, but there's a balance between coming in here with a fait accompli, which we didn't want to be that arrogant. But I think, with great respect to staff, Robbie and I have had these discussions with staff and probably more aligned as to what we should have produced to the committee than what was actually delivered to the committee. So that's the way it is, and we've got to move on from that. But where to from here? I'm happy to spend some time doing.
You've got to get a workshop organised offline, get it sorted well before the council meeting, eh?
Well, I just wonder, Noel, can you actually give us a draft resolution or words towards that we can consider in this meeting now that has things like the chairman in it, and it is the subcommittees are only for those 2 land drainage districts, and that's for a period of 1 year. In that 1 year time frame, we will look at other mechanisms for other areas. I mean, just something that we can consider.
If I may, Mr. I hear what you're saying. I think I would like to see an in-principle decision that, subject to an acceptable terms of reference, workshopped, that this committee supports option 2, so that we've got to have a reason to do it. And it's like the chicken and eggs I talked before, is what do we do first? What do we, one without the other is probably not easy.
I'm happy to bloom and support that, subject to a workshop where we all agree on everything, or the majority agree.
And that will
Happy
give
with it.
us the way forward so that we can work towards option 2, subject to a workshop that agrees in terms of reference. I don't know, I'll float that idea, Mr. Chairman, as an indicative resolution.
Does your terms of reference have to be out?
Just on that, my concern is we're potentially setting up subcommittees for the whole region when we adopt subcommittees, or are we setting them up just for these 2 land
Only
range
for
areas?
these 2. Yeah, to start. And you just replied to question.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So we are on a tight timeframe, certainly to hit next council meeting, but I'm sure we can organise something within the next few days to, eh?
Again, I totally support the workshop, and we should also workshop the appointment process, Greg, because that gets intensely political normally too. Thank you.
I've lost count of how many times I've been through this, and if you don't workshop it, you might as well put it off to the next council. It's no skin off my nose, it's your guys' representation, but
Yes.
Well, what we've just heard has landed exactly on my point. I was hoping to have had a discussion about this as a committee before we got to this stage. Because what we have, again, it just comes back to, if you can sit in a room and just have a chat about it, that would have been a great thing, but it didn't happen. And that's what we're now talking about, is holding a process where people can get round the table and discuss it. And rather than what we got, which was this bureaucratic document where people were differentially informed about what had been going on. Thank you.
He's coming back. We can do.
So just considering timeframes, so we, after this council meeting in June, there won't be one to August, so that's another couple of months away. So my advice to the committee is that we would attempt to have a workshop. It may have to be an online workshop with a pre-circulated draft terms of reference to work through, so that we can take something to the June council meeting on the 29th that has had some rigour and scrutiny across it.
We need to push up for B. Go ahead and do it. Shop first.
So what I'm hearing is that, and look, I'll take guidance from the committee, Mr. Chair, and from yourself, that there is some general support for moving in this direction, but obviously a lot of a need to really get into the detail that would sit behind an option 2, particularly in terms of reference and the various matters that are covered off. So whether there's an amendment to the recommendation that's up on the screen now to acknowledge that support in principle, whilst also requiring a further workshop to be undertaken prior to a proposed terms of reference being put before council for its consideration.
And the recommendation up for B.
Can I just ask a question before we carry on? With the previous committees, was there terms of reference? Is there a document floating around in council somewhere? So there is. Kind of over maybe in the last couple of trainings.
We had scheme river terms of reference, and we had drainage terms of reference. We're looking to put the two into one. So, yep. And that's a lot to do with cost as well.
Yeah, so certainly previous terms of reference wouldn't probably bear a lot of resemblance to what we'll be working through now in terms of the scope of the committees that we're talking about, but also the simple structure of council's terms of reference that they have in place at the moment.
Can you explain to me what C is there and how that fits in with B? 2C?
You.
B is option 2.
So can I move that, I remember what Noel said before, that subject to a constructive workshop where the committee can informally agree on a pathway forward, this committee supports option B. I'm saying that's a resolution I'm moving here. If you guys, subject to a workshop of ICM where we can informally agree on a pathway forward, committee supports option B.
Pathway forward, including terms of reference.
Pardon?
Including terms of reference, like pathway forward, including.
Yeah. And I was saying subject, just start at subject to, William, yeah.
This is the resolution. This is the resolution.
The resolution, yeah. Subject to an informal workshop.
They want this to be a new resolution.
So forget that.
Yeah.
B.
Yep.
So we're getting rid of this one.
All of that.
Well,
Yeah,
hold
but you're
on.
not, no, you've got to keep the central Waikato, Lower Waikato, Waiha and Piako. Otherwise, we're doing subcommittees for everything.
You're just wanting some, I mean, other stuff's just lemon bureaucratic stuff. We just do it. But I'm talking about B.
Yeah.
I'm saying that the council is happy to support option B, subject to a workshop where we work out the details. Let's just keep it really simple. And can I suggest, I'll let you write that down, William, and then I'll suggestion.
He's still confused where it's. And it,
So A and C. Go.
No, I'm just saying replace A, B, and C with a simple resolution. So make it. Yeah. Subject to a successful workshop to sort the details out. The committee supports option B.
Well, then B has to be.
yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't know. But you know where I'm going. Eh?
If you get rid of A and C.
Yeah, well, so for Stu, so that's subject to blah, blah, the council supports B.
They
Supports and
option
the
B.
supports the following, and B just becomes the following.
Yeah.
It's gone down.
No one's agreeing to anything without a workshop to sort the blooming details out.
So take A out.
Yeah.
And before you get, so before A, that's subject to a workshop, which is what Stu's talking about, and I touched on earlier. Subject. Carry on, Stu.
But yeah, a workshop being convened, whatever, yeah.
Are you happy with that?
Yep, this committee supports,
Do you want this going?
yeah, it's not helping,
I'm just wondering if helping is it's a workshop around the terms of reference to formalise the terms of reference, because therefore everything will be in it, Stu.
yeah, no, you're right, you're spot on,
Okay.
Pamela. That's it.
Convened in the near future to develop the terms of reference. Council supports the following.
Start from the beginning, please.
So for where you are there, that to develop a draft terms of reference. For council's consideration. This committee supports option B. Oh, yeah, that's messy again, isn't it?
Supports the following because.
Hang on, now, this committee supports the creation of.
Okay.
No, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. This committee supports the creation of a formal advisory arrangements. Formal advisory arrangements to support, take off, see the bottom line of option B there. Yeah, just paste all that in there, yeah.
So this?
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it'll be,
So take this off and then put it in option A.
Yeah, I just continue with what you're writing with it.
so my recommendation, if I understand the intent right, would be to amend council's governance structure.
Oh, you guys can. look into
So I
that.
think it'd be important to include that, point B in its entirety.
It's all back in, that has to all go back in. All B has to stay, all of B has to stay.
Now, can I suggest that you, Robbie, and Noel, write down what you want, which is kind of pretty close to what Noel just said, and then give it to Gregor to make Greg's life 100 times easier. I mean, do we need to give you some formal direction there, Greg, or are you?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy with the recommendation. And there's enough information that we have to have a strong starting point for terms of reference.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah, that was supposed to be one sentence, hey, William.
where do we talk about the fact there's only two
Yeah,
subcommittees,
yeah.
not four?
Well,
as
that's
previously.
what the TOR will say.
Okay, yeah.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the terms of reference will be specific to the specific committees, scope, etc.
But please get it out to us at least a week before the meeting so that we can ring you guys up and say, don't like that. Or we do or we don't. Minutes. Oh, yeah, you're right, Pamela.
Yeah. It's two. I mean, what was
It's supposed to have that bottom part about support the management of council's flood protection and drainage schemes. It was there, you must have.
No, but Greg said all of B has to stay.
Should we stop for 5 minutes and then come back? This is, yeah.
June. Yeah, okay, thank you. We're June for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, you guys
Hey?
sort it out.